Welcome back to Hints and Guesses, my podcast. Kent here. It is a wild and windy last day of February here in Michigan. The snow is beginning to melt and the light is changing. I can feel the shifting of the season here. My horses got out yesterday. That was not the way I wanted to meet the neighbors, really. My doorbell rang at 7:30 in the morning. And they had walked about a mile and a half to a really nice suburban neighborhood where the first, glimpses of green grass were poking up through the lawns of our neighbors. And so anyway, that was an adventure. Everyone was okay. And I don't know. I'm feeling this shift of seasons, and it corresponds to the calendar, really, the Christian calendar, the calendar of the seasons. One of the things that is just obvious if you study history like I did and historical geography, that was my technical field of study before I got into comparative religion, and it's interesting that all of the ancient festivals in the Hebrew Bible and the entire Christian calendar is deeply connected to the seasons. It's you can't have a conversation, a kind of ritual conversation around meaning without it being deeply embedded in the cycles and patterns of the earth. And we sort of forget that when kind of church worship is extracted out of the natural rhythms of life and the natural rhythms of the earth. And but of course, it doesn't have to be so extracted. It can be interwoven. And I was just thinking about, because Ash Wednesday is coming, and it's not like I'm a big follower of the church calendar. It just sort of appears on my my Apple calendar to remind me. And there's something about this upcoming Ash Wednesday that kind of just struck a chord, and it has to do with even the terrain. I want to invite us into again today. I'm continuing on with my series of Jesus, in my series looking at Christ as symbol here, and I'm on to stage 2 in these 7 stages. And so I'm re-releasing this audiobook on the podcast here, and so I've been listening to it, and this is stage 2, which is the stage of calling, and you'll feel there's a bridge between the early calling of Jesus and the latter calling of Jesus, and then the next stage after that will be really entering the wilderness, and in a kind of cool way, I'm kind of more or less accidentally following the church calendar, because Ash Wednesday and the 40 days up to Easter, one of the stories that commemorates that is the baptism of Jesus and entering into the wilderness, which we're sort of like moving through just kind of naturally in the year. I didn't really plan it that way. And I guess one of the more sobering and I think powerful ancient rituals is to have ashes put on your body and on your forehead, and be told you're going to die. From dust you came, to dust you shall return. It's a meditation on death, and not for morbidity's sake, but for life's sake. The fragility and the impermanence of everything quickens questions of meaning and depth and purpose and faith and doubt and love. And yes, like, I need to be reminded, and I don't know if I'll go to a church on Wednesday. Actually, I'll be traveling, so I don't think I will, but in my own way, I want to find a way to mark this day. And my wife was asking me, she actually didn't ask, is there anything you're going to give up for Lent? In fact, I don't even think she brought up Lent, but she asked me, is there anything that you know right now that is a hindrance to your own growth, like something daily, like that is a kind of block? And it was just obvious, and I'm almost like a walking cliche like everybody else, but I knew right away, not in a shameful kind of finger wagging, collective mean parent way, but just in a quiet, simple way. Yeah, it's scrolling. It's like I'm really that basic. I waste time scrolling. And I was thinking about that motion of the thumb. You can feel it right now. You do it right now as I'm talking that. Nope, not this, not this, not this, not this. Next, next, next. What's next? What's next? The thumb, the thumb, the thumb. And the right thumb, the left thumb. And like it's a pattern. It's a habit. It's an addictive cycle. It's a spirit crushing, soul diminishing motion. And on the very digit that makes us unique, the thumb that separates us from our closest ancestors, the way our hands work, in a way, partly what created the evolution of our own humanity and the emergence of consciousness, and I'm not really exaggerating, is now one of the things that hinders it through our own wild capacity to create technologies that would stifle the spirit. And I'm not preaching at anybody. I'm just saying, nah, that's the way it feels to me. And so this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to invite you into it. And maybe it can be, maybe this podcast can kind of come alongside this sort of remembering of Christ and the Christ symbol, the Christ way, what I'm calling a life transform, might speak to you. And so a fast from something, like an emptying, a self-emptying, is to also feel the space between what's lacking, the hunger and the thirst. And it's like a fast is a way of pouring yourself out and waiting. And I just thought, well, that's the thing right in front of me. I'm going to try to quit scrolling. As simple as that sounds. 40 days, no scrolling. I don't know how I'm going to remind myself of this, but I want to try it for 40 days. I'm not being a saint. I'm not saying making everyone aware I'm not on social media. I'm just not going to use that thumb motion and see what happens. So if you want to join me, I'll see you on the other side on Easter. We'll go back to scrolling, or we'll reassess then. And so that's a little invitation for this season, for the flow, for the return of the light, for this waiting period between Ash Wednesday and Good Friday and the resurrection of the dead here. And okay, so that's the invitation, and I kind of want to turn to the podcast here pretty quickly. A couple things to watch for. I'm kind of busy with Animas Valley Institute offering some programs. I just finished one a couple days ago on nature and the human soul. It was just awesome. Like, meeting online in this way is a great introductory way into this material. And so I have another online opportunity through Animas, an introduction to soulcraft. That's March 28 to 30. All this is on their website, animas.org. And I have two programs in April. One, April 14 to 18, that's in Ojai, guiding with a friend, Brian Stafford. And then April 30 to May 4, I just more or less said yes to this opportunity, a Wild Mind program with a friend named Sarah. We'll be co-guiding that. So these are excellent, awesome programs. So if I don't know, that kind of nature-based psychological and spiritual work has, been speaking to you, and maybe you have a window of opportunity here and you want to try something new, these are some opportunities coming up here in the future. So I wanted to put them on your radar. As always, thanks to my patrons. You're keeping this thing going. You're inspiring me. Thanks for your contributions, and I'm trying to grow my patrons. If I can get, I sort of said at the beginning of re-releasing this audiobook, which I originally made available to my patrons, I said I'll make another one only available to patrons if I get to 200. That was my astronomical goal of 200 patrons. That's how it felt, and it's growing. So thanks to the new ones here, and well, I'm sure I'll get to know you here shortly. I like to do little half-hour one-on-one check-ins with my patrons from time to time. So hit me up for that. And I think that's it. I think that's it for an introduction. Please pass on this podcast, share it. You know, we live in a world where now everyone has a podcast, it seems like, and, you know, the landscape is flooded with good things. But if you find something here, a hint, a guess, a clue for your own spiritual life, for your own development, pass it on to people who you think might also be fed by it. So wishing you all the best. See you down the road. Stage 2. Stage 2, I've decided to call The Calling. Originally, I thought about just calling it Guru or even Adolescence. And I like calling better because I want to explore what begins to happen in Jesus' early life, which we know very little about. What happens in terms of his own sense of aim, direction, calling, and with that comes teachers into his life, or guru. And I mean guru in the most positive sense, not in the cheap way people use it today, but as a kind of a teacher on a level that not only has depth, but that begins to call something forth within the student. That's fundamentally different than a teacher who has things to say. It's fine if a teacher has things to say. All right, they're delivering information that you do something with. But a guru, or maybe you could even say a rabbi, or as Mary Magdalene says of Jesus, my rabbi, Rabboni, which is first person possessive in Hebrew, means, okay, no, this is something, a deep chord is struck within and is pulling something out of me that was there all along. And I'll come back to this idea in a few minutes, but I want to begin with, as I did previously, with a gospel text. This reading is from the Gospel of Luke. Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the feast of Passover, which of course is the feast where Jesus' life ends during Passover. So a little bit of foreshadowing here. Every year, his parents went to Jerusalem for the feast of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the feast according to the custom. After the feast was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day, and they began looking for him among the relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, again, interesting sort of symbolic number here, they found Jesus in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying to them. Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart. There's that line I was using earlier. And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature, in favor with God and men. From the Gospel of Luke, one tiny window into the early life of Jesus. And back to ancient stories about heroes and figures and gods and goddesses, not only are the birth stories important, but what happened in their early life? What early clues did we get of this child's emerging destiny, with the borders of fate pressing in, the circumstances, the zip code, the economic realities, the the siblings, whatever, what I was calling fate. where are the early signs that this child is connected to the deeper thread? And where might the story be going? What direction is it aiming toward? In other words, questions of destiny. And so to include this is really important from a mythic point of view. And when I say mythic, maybe I should have said that before, I don't mean false, I actually mean true. A myth is true. And it's just not always historical, or its primary language isn't history. It's metaphor and image and symbol and depth. In fact, I don't know if you know much about non-canonized gospel texts, like the Gospel of Judas and the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and so forth and so on. There are dozens of them. Most of them were written around 300 or 400 AD, some of them 500 AD. And a few of them, like the Gospel of Thomas, might go all the way back to some of the earliest texts. In any case, there are several that try to fill in the gaps between this story when Jesus was 12 and when he appears on the scene with John the Baptist. Some of them are quite funny. I'll give you some examples. This is just for fun. So there's one where I think this is in the Arabic Gospel of Jesus, something like that. I don't remember the full title. It doesn't matter. I guess you can trust me on this. Jesus is playing, and a boy is running and bumps into Jesus, and he dies. Like something like maybe Jesus' power or something, and the boy dies, and the mothers are all wailing and grieving, and Jesus is fine and resurrects the boy. And now, personally, I don't think this is a question of historicity. How reliable are these stories? It's much more a question of what were people beginning to imagine Jesus to be like, and what did they imagine his early life to be like, and what were they trying to communicate with such stories, such images? There's another one where Jesus is playing down by a river bank, and he's making clay birds, and some people see him, and they say, hey, it's the Sabbath, you can't create anything on the Sabbath, which is, of course, a law in Judaism. And so Jesus says, fine, and he makes the birds fly away, and they fly off, whatever, into the sunset. That's the kind of thing. Now, again, just trying to fill in the gaps. It's just a desire. What early hints and guesses were a part of Jesus' life? And in the Gospels, the only one we have, and it seems like from a historical point of view, it seems like a fairly reliable story, just in terms of historical critical scholarship, if you want to know. Jesus is going to Jerusalem. It gives a little clue that every year his parents do that. There are 3 pilgrim festivals, and the most important is Passover. So if you had the money and if you had the time, you wanted to go to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. So that's what Jesus is doing at age 12. And a couple other things that I think are important about the story before we get into kind of the symbolic layers, the undercurrents here. He's not yet a man. From a Jewish point of view, he's not 13. That's when you have your bar mitzvah. That's when the age when Abraham first circumcised Ishmael. So very potent and powerful age. And of course, that gets changed to 8 days old with Isaac, who's the other son of Abraham. But there's something that's a window into the ancient world. That there's something about that line between 12 and 13, between boyhood and adulthood, or the changing phase of adolescence, that is absolutely critical for growing up. And ancient cultures dreamed up all kinds of ways to enhance that transitional phase, because there was sort of an acknowledgement that people don't grow up very easily. Men or women, but especially men, especially boys. And so some kind of crucible, some kind of pressure, some kind of ordeal, some kind of fast, some kind of ritual was meant to enhance that time period in life and crank up questions of who am I and what is meaningful in life, and and really, in a sense, meant to humble the young person and give them a larger vision for why why be a participant in this thing called life, other than the small vision of my needs, my wants, who's going to take care of me, but beginning to look toward a larger life that includes the whole, the community, the village, the tribe, the cosmos, the earth, the birds, and so forth. So Jesus is reaching that age, and that's why I think Luke picks up on it. Let's look into this little window into Jesus' early life and sniff around for questions of destiny, or what we could simply say calling. And I think calling can might leave a bad taste in your mouth. It left a bad taste in my mouth, at least for a little while, because I grew up in the church, and my dad was a pastor, my grandpa was a pastor, and I was around a lot of pastors, and they were always talking about, well, God called me to do this or that, and just in my own childhood imagination, I sort of thought, oh, I guess God shows up one day and whispers something in your ear. And to not experience something like that as a child was a little confusing. What is meant by this? And so sometimes I just wanted to throw the whole thing out. Like, it just seemed too easy, because people can obviously use it for an excuse, like, hey, God called me to move my family over here to such and such a place or church or job, and you can't argue with it. You can't say, well, God also told me in a dream last night. That's not what we should do. I mean, it's like it's hard to argue with. But Joseph Campbell says calling is an absolutely essential part of the journey. The hero or heroine's journey, a sense of calling. And calling is not the same thing as being told what to be, what kind of job to take, and even necessarily what the steps are. It's just a kind of luring, a beckoning, an overwhelming sense of curiosity about something. And that curiosity is going to take you to the edges and to the limits of your world up to that point. And that's what's happening in the temple in Jerusalem. Jesus gets there, and there's something about being in the presence of the rabbis and the teachers of the law and those who care about the great conversation that Judaism was trying to have with the mystery of the divine. There was something about just being in their presence and in the heart of Judaism, so to speak. What's interesting about this is not so much about the temple. It's not like he wanted to be near the sacrificial system. It says specifically the teachers and the rabbis. So it's like, no, the great conversation that is happening here, it just hooks him, draws him. That's calling. It's not, hey, this is what you should do with your life, or now it's all, carefully laid out. It's just, it will not leave him alone. And he's so drawn to the rabbis and teachers that he stays behind. And his parents don't even know he's missing for a day. And then it's not till 3 days later that his parents finally show up and like, what the heck are you doing? And that's, I think that gives us a window into the symbol here of calling. Calling is something like the early drawing out of something, like a tuning fork. Something out there rings something within. That's what can happen with a great teacher. Something out there in what he or she says rings something in here that I already knew was true, but I didn't really know was true. And I want to be near it. That's the first feeling. I don't want to, I want to get close to this. I had that with Richard Rohr a little bit. I was like, I've never heard anybody talk like this. And it was like a tuning fork. And I remember him even saying one time, I listened to hundreds of hours of his talks for many years. This went on. And I remember he said that he always enjoys the compliment of, well, you just told me something I already knew was true. And Richard Rohr says, that's when I know I'm kind of on the right track. That's that resonance that happens between teacher, guru, and student, disciple. And that kind of warmth and passion and interest and even a little bit of fear that wells up is part of how you know it's real. That the calling is happening. And the calling is whispering in your ear, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What do you want your life to be about? What kind of risks are you willing to take? What if you left all this and just said yes to the call? That's what's happening in the temple already at age 12. And the other thing I might want to say is there's something strange that happens when you begin to wake up to the second half of life. So maybe a little bit of a detour here. It's Carl Jung that came up with first half of life and second half of life. And don't think too hard and fast or too rigid about these things. But let's just say the first half of life is very much about building a persona and an ego, having a few successes, learning to navigate the complex world, finding a job and a survival dance that makes sense to you and to others. That's part of social identity, having a sense of I belong here, and also a sense of this feels like my kind of thing, my kind of job, or my kind of lifestyle, or my kind of aesthetic sort of disposition, acquiring an ego identity. And I will also say that's becoming increasingly difficult. People are having a hard time growing up. And many of us need really first half of life help right now, not just second half of life. And I mean, these can come in tandem, of course, but there's a lot of unfinished business about my own sense of self and self-worth and capacities. And I actually think that's part of the growing attraction of the Enneagram and other kinds of self-identity tools. It really helps with first half of life. How am I wired, we could say, but I just used air quotes. How am I wired? Very important, and actually has to happen for us to grow up. And we could say the same of Jesus. What are first half of life concerns? Well, what's my dad do for a living? What am I gonna do for a living? Which is the same thing as whatever your dad does for a living in the ancient world. Who are my neighbors? Who are my siblings? How do I operate in the social world? What's my religious life like? What are my obligations? How do I live as a Jew? Keeping the Sabbath and the festivals and the kosher diet and all that kind of stuff that's wrapped up in a social identity, and you're trying to find your place in that. Very much first half of life concerns. The second half of life is when you leave all that. And I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit in the story, but it's like you finally build the house and there's a knock on the door and it's time to go. And some people just refuse to go. They refuse to go. They say, I'm happy here in the first half. Or they say, okay, my life kind of fell apart. I'm going to redo the first half again. And I don't really want to descend and ask the deeper existential questions of what the hell am I doing? Who am I? What's mine to be in the world? Where are the golden threads that have been there all along? It seems too hard. So I get it. I understand. And I mean, maybe all of us backpedal a little bit when we start to feel that pull. And that's the calling into the second half of life. But here's where I'm going with this. Here's kind of something mysterious about it. When you begin to walk into the second half of life, it feels a little like a homecoming. It feels a little like connecting back again with something that was there all along. It feels like coming back home to oneself. And all of a sudden, some of those early clues, those early hints and guesses, that one time in the temple where you lost all track of time and it was almost a transcendent moment. There I was sitting with the rabbis and I felt like this is it. It's like rediscovering that. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. This happened to me a little bit when I was approaching 40 and was going through all kinds of stuff, everything from leaving my job as a megachurch pastor, and then my dad died of ALS, and I was entering a program at Animas Valley Institute in Colorado where I a year-long program of really a deep dive into sort of psychospiritual stuff, and I was really in a phase of wandering again in my life, though I had kind of been all over. I'd lived in Israel and done a couple of different things for a living, but I was really feeling that pull. And interestingly enough, partly because of Animus, I ended up doing a lot of practices and spending a lot of time outside. And that's what felt like a homecoming, because since I was a little kid, the woods was my church, really. It was the place I felt home and, in a way, seen, and a place where I didn't have to wear any masks. And there was no conscious thought when I was, a little kid. I just liked being in the woods, and I spent hours just wandering around and playing and imagining and drawing and doing not much of anything. And to all of a sudden realize, I lost this thread. And it was very healing. Now, a lot of other things were going on too that were very challenging, but it was like, oh yeah, I forgot. As I began to search for the natural Kent, as I like to joke with my therapist, I was finding out more and more about this natural state of being by being out in nature, by being out in the wild world. And so I think something like that is happening here with Jesus. That early call, that whatever conversation is taking place here at age 12 is the kind of conversation I want to be in the rest of my life. If I die having this conversation, then I die having pursued destiny and not just been tossed around by the cruelness of fate, but I went for it anyway. And here he is going for it at age 12. Now he goes home and he continues to be a good little boy, we could say. Does what mommy and daddy say mostly. Of course, we don't know for sure. But he's not wandering away anymore. But that early line, I have to be in my Father's house. I have to be in my Father's house. I have to be about something larger than what you want, Mom and Dad. Imagine knowing that somehow in your bones at age 12. My life is about something more. You want me to go and live in Joseph's house. I want to live in my Father's house. And how big is that house? Yeah, there's the house in Jerusalem, but there's the house of the whole earth. Something like that is beginning to dawn. And my suggestion is that's the calling. That's the beginning of the calling. Now, the calling is going to unfold, and it's going to take its own little path, and there are going to be plenty of forks in the road yet to come, but the thread appears here. And what's interesting to me is that he's sitting with the rabbis and scholars here at 12, and then we meet him again. He's being baptized by John the Baptist. And without getting kind of too technical in terms of contemporary research, a lot of scholars, a lot of trusted scholars, a lot of scholars that I like and read, have suggested that probably what happened is that Jesus was a follower of John the Baptist. John the Baptist is his cousin, of course, and he's a little older than Jesus, and he has a huge following. In fact, we know he has a huge following because Josephus, the Jewish historian turned Roman, has a lot to say about John the Baptist. And even when Paul starts traveling around in the Gospel of Acts, he gets all the way to Ephesus, which is, more than 1,000 miles from the land of Israel, and there are followers of John the Baptist out there in Ephesus, which is in Asia Minor, today Turkey. So big movement, massive movement. And John the Baptist was a wild, charismatic, camel skin wearing, long hair, long beard, wild ass of a man who was eating bugs and honey and carob pods and baptizing people in the Jordan River. And he was very apocalyptic, saying, this age is done. This is a wicked generation. It's about to pass away. And change your minds, change your heart, change your ideas, change your life. And he's out there making a big scene, and it's attractive. Finally. And John the Baptist, by the way, is a priest. So he should be, quote unquote, in the temple doing his little duties, cutting up animals, sprinkling blood, waving incense around, fulfilling his duties. Instead, he rejects all that, doesn't wear the white robe of the priest, and returns back to nature, to the original temple of God, and begins to call people back to themselves and in right relationship to the mystery of God. That's the role of John the Baptist. And he does it in kind of that prophetic threat way. The prophets were notorious for threatening things. If you don't change, you're going to be destroyed. If you don't change, you're going to be destroyed. And the prophets right now who are screaming many of them are environmental prophets. And I don't mean they have some kind of crystal ball, but they're saying, if you don't change your way, you're going to die. And I think it's just an interesting ancient archetype that they're tapping into. So in any case, Jesus again begins to feel that tug, that call, and has to be around John the Baptist. It's that guru teacher pull again. The tuning fork is rung. And now it's not just the scholars in the temple. It's not just the scholars in the temple, that original call, but there's something about this prophetic mixture here that rings Jesus' inner bell here. And he wants to be around it. And he even insists, I want to be baptized by you. I want to go through this immersion. I want to go through the symbolism of death and resurrection, of down into the waters of chaos and out into the frame of the promised land, and of new life and of new wind and of new whatever. I have to submit to this. I too am the grain of wheat, dying and being reborn. And when Jesus comes up out of the water, which I'll get to in the next chapter, he's never the same. But I think I'm guessing here, it's a little bit of a guess on my part. Part of this calling would not leave Jesus alone. Maybe, every Friday night on the Sabbath, the sun goes down and they have a big family meal, and he's laying out there under the stars of Nazareth in the night sky, and he just can feel that tug, that whisper. He wants to be in the great conversation. And here he is cutting stones, for dad or whatever. And I think John the Baptist wakes that up again. And it's enough is enough. I'm 30 years old and I'm still at home, and he begins the process of leaving. So at this point, I want to say it as directly as I can in terms of the stages that are unfolding. You can hear the call and refuse the call. You can hear the call and not go. You can hear the call and reject the call. And you can hear it, and you can hear it, and you can hear it. And it's really not until you say, I'm leaving. I'm out of here. Like God says to Abraham, leave your land. Leave your people and leave your dad. Get out of here. That the cycle of the vortex of family demands is broken, and the hero or heroine is off on the next chapter of the journey. And that is beginning here at age 12 in terms of calling, and culminating when Jesus goes out to be baptized by John the Baptist, which is really part of the next chapter. But I want to make that bridge in terms of the necessity of leaving home. And maybe it's also worth saying that the Bible, the book of Genesis, has a very interesting line, and it says, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be united with his wife. And that might sound kind of patriarchal and old-fashioned to you, but let's just take it as a symbol for a moment. If you don't leave home, you're not going to grow up. And many people get married and never leave home. They never leave home psychologically, spiritually, philosophically, intellectually. They transfer many of the same expectations that their parents had on them, or they had for their parents, onto their spouse. And from a psychological point of view, they're still trying to please mom and dad. Even if mom and dad are long gone. And it's just one of the traps that human beings fall into. And I suppose we could say all of us fall into it to a certain extent. And that's why leaving home is so important. You don't grow up until you cut the cord. You really don't. And it doesn't mean you have to leave the state, although that will sometimes help, but not always. You can imagine living on a different continent and still the fundamental desire to get the love of your parent is really the thing that's keeping you going. But that tends to keep us small. And I think hearing the call, being curious about the call, what is mine to do in the world? Who am I to be in the world? What am I supposed to do with my one wild and precious life? As that begins to awaken with a sense of calling, it's going to culminate with a sense of taking the risk and stepping out and finding out what's real and what's not. I really wish it was different. I wish you got a sense of calling and then you got an email and it said, okay, here's the next step, here are the next steps, and here's your CV, and here's a job, and here's a salary to go along with it. It just doesn't happen that way. The risk is great. So Joseph Campbell says that the culmination of the calling happens when you move into the zone unknown. That's what he calls it, the zone unknown. It's not the known zone. It's not I feel the beckoning and I'm stepping into what I know. It's I feel the beckoning, I'm stepping into what I don't know. I'm saying that started with Jesus at age 12. I'm not doing what my parents say, and I have to be around this, the zone unknown. And it culminates with this guru-like prophet figure ringing Jesus's bell, and he says, this is what I got to do. And he walks from Nazareth to the Jordan River, which is something like, depending on where John the Baptist was, he walks 40 or 50 miles to be near this guy and to be near the movement and the energy and that was happening with John. And he's never the same. And in a sense, he never goes back home. So here are some questions about calling. Here's the first one. What's your earliest sense of calling? I mean, I really think it's worth thinking about. What's your earliest sense of calling? What rung your bell at age 12? And it doesn't matter what kind of household you came from. One where there was a lot of suffering and a lot of trauma, or one that was, quote unquote, happy or not broken. No one says, I came from a not broken home. All homes are broken to a certain extent. And what uniquely rung your bell at age 12? And don't panic if you can't think of it right away. It may be far more subtle of a thing than at first we might assume. Like music or a certain painting or a certain book or a certain movie or film. Those might be kind of accessible, but it might be far more subtle than that. Like a certain feeling you had in a landscape. You went on a family vacation and all of a sudden you found yourself alone, and it was the feeling of the landscape. There was something about it that was awakening and pulling you. Like, you belong here. So sometimes it's hard to remember and even recover that early sense, but it's worth asking. What's your earliest sense of calling? What rung your bell? And what wouldn't leave you alone? Maybe that's the kind of the second half of that question. And even now, what keeps coming up? What keeps coming up that seems like, this is old. This is old. This keeps coming up in my life, and I really haven't looked at it. I've maybe pushed it down because I'm afraid of what it might ask of me. Yep, that's calling. If there is a certain mixture of resistance and attraction, it might be what I'm calling here the symbol of calling. Stage 2 in a life transformed here. Stage 2 as it's being revealed to us in the ongoing transformation of Jesus. So that's the first question. Here's another one. Have you entered the zone unknown? And you could even go back a little bit, because remember, everything we're talking about is symbolic and rich and has no bottom. It's like peeling an onion away. It's not hard and fast. You don't go through this one time necessarily. You might go through it. There might be certain seasons that feel way more intense, but this pattern is likely to repeat itself. So it's worth asking, have I entered the zone unknown sometime in my past? Did I take a risk? And what was that like? What did I learn? Was it a success? Was it a failure? Did it feel right? Was it worth it? And maybe a more scary question is, am I about to enter the zone unknown in my own life? I can see the storm brewing, and I don't want to just hunker down in the basement. I want to meet it head on. I want to walk out the door with a rain jacket and nothing else to turn toward this. So what's that like? Have you entered, or are you about to enter the zone unknown? And it's worth reminding yourself, if it's really the zone unknown, you don't know. You don't know what it will be like. You don't know how you will navigate. You don't know if the tools that you have acquired up to this point are going to help you or get in the way. And that's a pretty scary place to be. But it's not just a scary place to be. Something of the soul says, finally. Something of the gold thread of your own life says, yep, now you're talking. Now you're talking. This is what I came to do. This is what I came to be. This is what I came to find out. And I'll die trying. That part of us begins to awaken. And it gives it just enough courage, I think, to take the big risks. So here's another question along the same lines. What voices will not leave you alone? Now, I'm not just talking about internal voices, though there may be a kind of soul-like whisper that keeps whispering something into your ear. That's probably the most important voice. But I also mean your gurus and teachers. Who are they? Like, make a list. Like, really, make a list. I might put Thomas Merton. I might put Richard Rohr. I might, I've got actually tons of them that I might put on my list. And then I think not only might I make a list of my teachers, I might want to write a sentence or two about them. And here's what the sentence or two would say. This is how they live in the world, even if you have to guess. Or this is what I think they're embodying in the world. And the kind of voice and role, even if I think to myself, there's no way I could do anything like that, which is often how projection works and shadow works. But I might say I could never do this, but one thing I love about them, and one thing I know they're doing in the world, put that down. Just a sentence or two, each of them, each of the voices. And you could even go back in time a little bit. Maybe I had some professors in college. I had a music mentor friend of mine who was a college professor, but he wrote all these songs. His name is Scott Baker, for the church I went to in Lynchburg, Virginia. And little did I know, I didn't even like church, and I went every single week because there was something about this music. It rung my bell. There was a richness, there was a deepness, and it wasn't just that. It was the kind of energy that Scott embodied that was alluring and attractive and called forth something of my own depths. Ask something more of me in the world. And I would have never guessed this, but just a couple years after college, I was playing all those songs at a, several thousand member megachurch, something I could have never dreamed up or cooked up on my own. This is Mars Hill in Grand Rapids here in the early days. Rob was a teacher, and I did the music, and more important than having a body of work, it was the way Scott lived his life that was so attractive and challenged me and called forth more of my own golden thread. So name those people from the past. Name the people right now in the present. Who are the voices? What are they saying? What are they embodying? And then third, what must I do? What, in light of this, in light of the energy that they are bringing forth in the world, living their own sense of calling, what's mine to carry here? What do I need to own and bring forth and not just let them carry? Because here's the downside of having a guru. You can just follow the guru until the day you die. And wow, I just got really close and I tracked every word and I took a lot of notes and I used a lot of quotes. I'm the master of quoting people, just quotes upon quotes upon quotes. One of my professors in college says, man does not live on quotes alone. And that's a quote that I'm giving you. So it's like, but at a certain point, when am I going to leave? When am I going to leave home and begin to carry what is mine to carry in only the way that I can carry it? Having learned what I can learn from the guru and then break up with the guru. In Buddhism, this is called slapping the master. You can even get a sense of it in the Jesus story. I have to be in my father's house. Smack! That's smacking his parents upside the head. And in Zen Buddhism, it's the same thing. In order to have the courage to leave sometimes, the great teacher, you have to reject, smack him in the face, and then take the risk of walking out of the monastery. Then the real work begins, we could say. Which, let me just reiterate the question that came out of that question, which is, what must I do? What's mine to carry? And even if I have a sense of some aspect of that, the way to find out more about it is to begin to carry that. Like St. Francis says to his followers, I have done what is mine to do, now you must do what is yours to do. I have done what is mine to do, now you must do what is yours to do. Jesus says, you go preach the kingdom of God. Go do it in the way you would do it. And that requires a lot of autonomy, a lot of risk, and a certain kind of leaving, a leaving home. Which leads me to my next question. Have you really left home? Have you really, really, really left home? And like the center of gravity in your life has shifted to the zone unknown. You're no longer operating around the sun of your parental images, but you've left the orbit in some way. And that's actually it's hard to just answer like yes or no. It's much more a kind of curious question that needs probing. And then you might need some therapy, you might need some help, you might want to ask your friends, you might want to ask your significant other if you have one. Hey, am I still, in some ways, am I just still a kid? That's worth a hard look in the mirror. Have I really left home? And here's the final question. What's your father's house? Quote unquote. I have to be in my father's house, Jesus says. What is that for you? What is your father's house? What is the vision that's larger than your earthly father and mother and your earthly, caregivers and schools and first teachers and first loves even? I have to be in my father's house. I have to be near this. This is where meaning is found. This is where meaning is pursued. And if I give up on this, I give up on destiny. I give up on the golden thread. I give up on what's possible. I give up on the potentiality of my own life. And I remain small. I remain just operating around the sun of my parental images. So what is it for you? What is your father's house? And likely, if you're able to give some words to that, words will be insufficient. Words will be insufficient to describe the allurement of your father's house. And maybe here's a challenge. If you have a sense for what that is and you haven't left, okay. You know what might be asked. And easier said than done, of course. So here's a little PS to stage 2. Don't worry about a job. Now, I'm not saying, live like a a vagabond. I'm saying don't worry about thinking about calling being a job. What was Jesus's job? He didn't have a job. I mean, you could say he was a tecton or stonemason when he was a kid, but no mention of it, you know? He may have had one, actually. It's just not the center of his life. It's just whatever his survival dance was. He paid the bills, so to speak. Or he figured out a clever way with the help of his disciples and friends and these women that followed Jesus around to at least have a full belly some of the time. But it's not a job. I mean, we live in a job-obsessed culture where the first thing we're asked at a party is, what do you do? You know, what do you do? And people want to know, how do you make a living? That's what they want to know. They're not satisfied with some sort of symbolic answer. You know, I don't do. I just am in the world. You know, people are like, oh, whatever. This guy's a dork. They want to know. They want because of the desire to categorize and label and hierarchies and you know, just the way the world works. And I'm not even criticizing it, but that's not calling. That's not. I have to be in my Father's house. The Father's house is the kind of place you'll be in whether you get paid or not. And if you're lucky enough to sort of carve out a living from being in your father's house, so to speak, or mother's house, if you want to switch it to the feminine, that's also fine. Then, great, added bonus. You know, just got a few extra bonus points. You know, but you'll do it penniless. You'll do it for free. You know, it's a way of being in the world, a way of moving and being in the world no matter what you do. That's the deeper elements of calling. That's the deeper sense of even a word like vocation, which means vox or voice. It's your voice in the world. So let go a little bit of needing it to be a job or thinking that calling is somehow confined to employment and what you're able to put on a resume. So that's what I got. Stage 2.